Hi, everyone. Welcome to the NEATCast podcast, episode 6. This is the podcast where we talk about mental health advances applicable to everyone's daily lives. My name is Dr. Dhakshin Ramanathan. I'm a psychiatrist and neuroscientist at UC San Diego. And you guys can introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jyoti Mishra. I'm a neuroscientist in the Department of Psychiatry at UC San Diego.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Nan, and I have my PhD in bioengineering, but now I'm working as a postdoc in psychiatry.
So I'm very excited today to talk about a paper that we recently published. This describes a personalized AI machine learning guided lifestyle intervention for depression, which is a mouthful, but actually is, in my opinion, the direction that we need to go in psychiatry. So I'm just going to speak a little bit to that. So, in psychiatry, we have for many treatments, a one size fits all kind of approach, right? So when somebody comes to my office and they tell me they're depressed, they're anxious, I say, well, here's what the evidence says can be helpful. That evidence can say medications can be helpful, psychotherapy can be helpful, but there's a lot of evidence that says lifestyle-based treatments for depression can also be helpful, right? These are things we often will tell people, you need to look at what you're eating and eat healthy foods. You should exercise. These have been shown to help people with depression, anxiety, mindfulness interventions, getting better sleep. A lot of times patients will say, I know, doc, I should be doing these things, but which one is the most important? And I'll say, well, I'm not sure which one is the most important. And that kind of gets into the fact that for different people, it's probably the case that different factors are important for them. And as a clinician, it's often a matter of guess and check, trial and error, right? Say, well, why don't you try exercising for a little bit of time and see how that goes? And that's not very satisfying as a clinician, right? To not really know what to tell people or how to guide them. And it's often not satisfying and it's overwhelming for patients. They'll say, oh, you're telling me to eat better and sleep better, and like that's too much. So this leads to this particular trial that Dr. Mishra spearheaded. I got to be part of it and associated with it. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to your own interests and motivations in this and tell us more about the paper and how it worked and what you did.
Sure, Dakshin. Great to be here. We're all part of the NEATLabs team at UCSD, and this project began actually 5 years ago or so, and I've really trained from a translational point of view of applying neuroscientific and neurotechnology advances to mental health care and psychiatry. And my goals were really that, of course, we understand that psychiatric disorders are very complex, and how can we leverage data, especially scalable data that is low cost and available in many settings, to understand the relationships between brain, body, and behavior and illness. And so the motivations of why this project started were really to figure out how we can use data from subjective information, which is from surveys that people can fill out on a daily basis about how they're feeling and what they're doing with their lifestyles, like Dakshin mentioned, important factors that doctors consider related to sleep, exercise, diet, connecting with others. And in our first iteration of the study, we also had EEG brain recordings as part of our modeling work that we first published in 2021. Our goals were really to say, okay, well, if a given person who may come to us with depression has fluctuating mood over time, how can we understand all the different lifestyle factors that we collect from them, from these different tools, from their smartphone, from wearables, from EEG, which was not part of this specific study, but previously we also integrated EEG. How can we use all of these different tools to really understand what is the the primary factors that are driving their mood on a day-to-day basis, and maybe that can eventually lead to a more informed and personalized treatment. And 5 years ago, the goals were really to just come up with analytics that would be at the personalized level. That in itself was an advance, because most studies are done with the individual being understood as part of a group. And most studies, they will put healthy individuals into a bucket, and then people with depression or another disorder into another bucket, and just compare groups. Where in this case, our goal was to really say, hey, for a given individual who's very unique that comes to us, what are their factors, unique factors? And
So
this
I'm gonna interject real quick. So what you did is to say people with depression, their mood doesn't stay always depressed. And I think that's an important point. Their mood, everybody's mood fluctuates. It gets better, it gets worse. And you try to collect information from them, subjective information, which is things that they can report, and then other kinds of information to try to predict what drove somebody's mood, what made it better, what made it worse.
exactly. That was the point, because we wanted to understand that for every individual there is this there's not a strict point on the scale that there's just one score of depression that we're looking at. Every day, one can go through better mood states versus worse mood states, and no matter how depressed one might be feeling, there might be times when you're feeling just slightly better than not. And so if we can consider that sort of as a continuum, then when you're feeling better, what is exactly happening in your life that's making it better? And especially factors that are actionable and control and could be in your control if you had insight on them. If for some person it might be more exercise that they're more sensitive to. Another person may eat more vegetables, and that's when they feel better. And given that we do so many things in our day, we may not be able to systematically track it ourselves, but that's the power of engineering and data that can provide these kinds of insights. And so at NEATLabs, the NE in NEATLabs is really engineering, and this part really would not have been possible without having brilliant engineers part of our team. And so Jason has spearheaded this engineering effort since our first paper in 2021, and then beyond that. And so Jason, would love to hear from you if you can tell people about what kind of engineering went into this project, what you found challenging, and what you find exciting in here.
Yeah, so well, the engineering aspect is like really exciting, like Jyoti mentioned. And one thing that, we kind of wanted to build around is this idea of passive sensing, right? Every single day, we're outputting as humans just infinite data one can think of. And consumer hardware has also caught on to this fact. And then if we look at 5 years ago till now, if we look at the number of people wearing smartwatches or Apple Watches, and now Aura rings or the Whoop, it seems like almost everyone is just collecting all of this data all the time. But, just by looking at it, people don't really know what it means. Like you look at sleep. Okay, I slept really good yesterday. So what? Like, oh, my heart rate is between like 100 and 120 BPM resting, but what does that really mean? Uh, and so it kind of gets really complicated to tease out all of these, what do they mean? And with the advances of like machine learning and AI, one thing that it's really good at is being able to sort through and understand large amounts of data or big data. You can think of it as. And so just, like being able to integrate all these different consumer hardwares and seeing, iteration after iteration of new hardware and being able to, just keep adding on to this suite that we have just makes it way more robust to just anyone who wants to use it, you know. And then additionally, building part of this platform, the idea is that we want people to actually use it. And how do we get people to use it? Well, you have to reduce the barrier of entry as much as you can. And so I'm happy to report that right now we have gotten to a stage where all you need to do is download an app, record some data and link up whatever wearable you have. And from there, a machine learning model will be just automatically built through the app, through a cloud server that we have, and you get a full printout of results. And just seeing this after we publish the paper, we have already gotten some people who are interested, that they've emailed, be like, hey, I really wanna use this. And it's very rare that you have a publication where you propose an intervention and it goes directly into the hands of the general public, like within a matter of days of the publication coming out. So that was, that was really cool. Um, and
I
then
think there was two parts maybe you could speak to. One part of the study was the machine learning model.
Mhm.
And then the second part of it was how did you, and Dr. Mishra, you can speak to this, how did you take the model and then create an intervention out of it?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. So the model, the crux of it, we collect all these passive sensing data, right? And then we want some way to relate that to how someone is feeling. So their depressed mood in this case. So, the first step is if we can build a machine learning model to predict someone's mood based on all their lifestyle attributes, whatever that may be. The idea is that if the model can accurately predict your depression, it at some level fundamentally understands what is causing, one person's depression. And from there, we can go one step further, and that is to actually use something called model explainers. And we can open up the machine learning model and see how it's making the determination. So we can start to understand why did it say this person would have, high depression based on all this data point. And if once we have that information, right, and this information comes in a sort of just list, right, most important features or most important variables that predict depression, we can start looking at trends within that list. So, for example, if we see a bunch of, diet-related variables as very important, then we say, oh, maybe this person needs a diet-based intervention. Conversely, if we see a bunch of exercise variables, an exercise intervention might be more suitable for them. And that in and of itself is very powerful because going back to the idea of people see a bunch of data and say, okay, what does that mean? Sometimes we're very biased within ourselves and trying to relate what we're doing to how we feel. One person might think that, they exercise a lot and that their exercise doesn't trigger their depression or whatnot. And then so they start focusing on their diet. But it could be that their understanding about how much they're exercising is fundamentally flawed or not tracking properly. So they have this internal bias, and that could lead people down, a fruitless endeavor. Or, if you have friends and they tell you, hey, I started doing this. I started like walking 20,000 steps a day and I start feeling great. Then you might say, oh, well, if it worked for them, it's going to work for me. And so you do 20,000 steps a day, but at the end of the day, you just feel very tired and sore, and it actually makes your like depression worse. But then you keep going at it because your friend told you to do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's
And
kind of where we are.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the really remarkable nature of how we came up with these individualized mood augmentation plans that we call in our paper IMAPs for short. And Dakshin, I remember in our initial conversations, that was something that was really surprising to you, that everybody did have a unique footprint or an IMAP that was that defined them, at least for the time that we were monitoring them. And keep in mind that this would change, at different points in life. One could have a different IMAP than, when you were being monitored, last year versus this year. And to Jason's point, we've seen that in the data many times that it's really potentially some people may be doing better when they're doing consistent low-level activity rather than more strenuous activity, or some people actually do better when they're chatting with people individually and not having a big group gatherings too often, and things that may seem counterintuitive, but that may promote an individual's well-being in a way that is that's insightful, that they could keep better track of, and promote and help optimize their well-being. And eventually it's kind of a closed loop system, potentially, for one person who's sleeping well 8 hours a day and their sleep quality is really good, and they get to bed easily, then sleep is not to be optimized. And it won't be surprising that that doesn't come up as a predictor of their fluctuating mood, because it's pretty flat most of the time. But there are other inconsistencies that could be worked out and that are relevant to their mood. And also how Jason mentioned, another thing that we're excited about this work is that it is very immediately translatable to a wider audience. When we do this as scientific research, we are, constantly building up these metrics of publications and, advancing data analytics, but really publications are our metric for scientific progress. But many times when we're developing a new scientific advance, especially interventions, how does that translate it to being used in the real world? That happens rarely. And so one of the goals for us for translation at NEATLabs has always been that how can we work with tools that are already scalable, that people may already have, like their smartphones, or like Jason said, any wearable that they might already have. And how can we plug those in instead of having a barrier of high cost tools to be made available to people, or new fancy sensors that we must develop first before we get this out there. So we're very excited more about the translation and scalability of the work, and I think this work has also progressed because, Dakshin, you've led NEATLabs as the co-director, really looking at how interventions in psychiatry that don't have the best remission rates, how the standard of care can be improved over time. And we'd love to hear more of that from you, because you really motivated this kind of work from the team.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before I get to that, maybe we buried the punchline, but how much better did people get after they went through? Like, tell us some of the amazing results you found.
Yeah, so we did see that 55% of people did achieve remission, which is much better than most trials that are showing 30% remission rates from other standard interventions. This comes with the caveat that this is still a study that's not a randomized control study. That is going to be our next step, but I think 55% remission just with a lifestyle intervention without any pharmacology or invasive work being done is really great, and something that people can do from their own home environment, never having to come in to see a professional, just interacting with a coach. I think that's a really great step to move forward with. Jason, also, you did some great analyses to really show that that the changes in mood were associated with changes in improvement in quality of life, which is hard to do. Also, improvements in cognition, so how people were paying attention, their memory, all of that, those metrics improved. And then a really nicely done analysis where Jason showed that what the lifestyle domain that was being targeted for a given individual, when that improved, then mood also improved directly proportional to that. And the lifestyle domains that were not being targeted did not improve similarly, in that it's not that if you target sleep, then everything else automatically improves. And that's why we're seeing the effects that we're seeing. It's that if we target sleep, then sleep improves, and then depression improves. And then our study ended at a 6-week time point in terms of the detailed tracking. And who knows, maybe the other lifestyle factors also improve after that. But really, it's this targeting and personalization to the lifestyle domain that matters towards improvement in the depressed state. But yeah, we're mostly very excited that many people felt a lot better and achieved healthy status at the end of the study.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I think I love about this approach is it can be added on and suitable at multiple stages of depression. And I think of depression across two axes. One is how long have you been depressed? So kind of the chronic aspect of it. And then how bad is the depression? How severe is it? And often when we think of mild to moderate depression, which is the vast majority of people with depression actually fall into that mild to moderate range, we may not want to recommend medications. We want to recommend things that are safer and healthier, but can still be effective. Of course, when we get to the severe depression range, that's often when, we'll say, oh, maybe you should be on a medication or really go to more intensive therapy. But the mild to moderate range, if we can have a personalized lifestyle intervention that we can deploy, that's scalable, that's shown to be effective, that's a great tool. It's an amazing tool that could be offered by primary care doctors who often, tell a lot of patients come to see their primary care doctor. They might not want to see a therapist or a psychologist or a psychiatrist, right? So I see this as really valuable at that level. And then also in the folks, they start a medication, they start some other treatment, they go into therapy, they go from, severe depression into the mild and moderate range. And then what do we do, right? We don't want to add another medication. We don't want to, hey, at this point, why don't you get into this lifestyle intervention? So I see this as a tool that can be used in multiple areas of behavioral health. And we have folks that we treat, we get into remission, and we want to keep them there. We want to say, hey, how could you start working on things to help prevent a new depression from coming, a relapse? And again, you say, okay, the beauty of this is this can apply to somebody who doesn't have depression too, right? We're just looking at what are the behavioral and lifestyle predictors of mood fluctuation that actually is relevant to depression, but it's relevant to everybody. We all have mood fluctuations, and we can all likely improve and benefit from knowing what are the things that we should do to help a healthier mood. So that's what I love about this, is it's an intervention that can be applied across the spectrum of problems from healthy to, maybe not the most severe depression, but almost up to that point.
Yeah, thank you for talking about the spectrum of depression. And like Dhakshin mentioned, most of the cases, at some point I read the stat that 85% of cases are in the mild to moderate range. And especially if we can use data to empower people to get to a better state, then also it prevents from the condition from worsening further, because without treatment, sometimes the condition also worsens further. And then we've also talked about applications of this project to non-mood conditions such as chronic pain. And we talked about that in a previous episode with Dr. Herbert. And so we hope to continue to apply this kind of analytical advance to other types of chronic conditions as well. And we're excited about that kind of work too. So I hope everyone enjoyed listening to us. Thank you, Dr. Nan and Dr. Ramanathan, for your expertise. And you can find us at the NEATLabs NEATCast, which is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And so that's our episode 6. Thank you, everyone.